Hey team, Coach Natalie here to talk to you a little bit about what the different focuses of the day can mean at the different stations here and how you can use your heart rate response as well as your rate of perceived exertion to kind of check in and make sure we're doing everything the way we're supposed to. So we can use that OTB, that heart rate monitor, to help us kind of check in about our performance, whether we're on the treads, the rowers, or the floor. On an endurance day, when you're on the tread, we're gonna see more mild fluctuations in our heart rate. So we might be at the bottom of our push, or at the bottom of the orange zone when we're on a push, and then most likely to come back into the green zone at some point during those base recoveries, with just a little bit of variance in our heart rate monitor throughout our pushes and bases. On the rower, we can expect, again, a more moderate intensity as we're rowing, again, around that 26 strokes per minute rate on the rower. We should be able to rack our handles and go right into our exercises. We might get a few splat points on the rowers on an endurance day, but it shouldn't be that the heart rate is getting so high we need time to rest in between our rowing and our exercises. More moderate, consistent intensity. On the weight floor, we're very unlikely to get any splat points on an endurance day. We're gonna be working with lighter weights for longer reps or higher reps, longer periods of time. So with that sort of mindset, our heart rate's not gonna be as high, but that's okay because like I said, we're gonna get up into the bottom of that orange zone on both the treads and the rowers. That said, on a strength day, we're gonna see inclines on the treads. So this is where we're gonna bring that incline up a little bit like we're going uphill. That's gonna elicit a push feeling from speeds that normally wouldn't feel like a push. That's gonna help us get up into the orange zone on those hills. But then when we bring that incline down, we're again likely to return back to that green zone on our base recoveries on that 1% Orange Theory flat road for runners and joggers, or at our base incline for power walkers. On the rower, we're gonna be pushing hard off that foot plate with a lower stroke rate. This amount of work, especially with the lower body, is gonna elicit a little bit more of a higher heart rate response on the rower. So we're probably gonna see ourselves earning a couple splat points, maybe even more than a couple, when we're on the rower on a strength day. So be mindful of that as we're going through our motions. We can check in with that heart rate monitor. Even though we're at a lower stroke rate, we're pushing hard enough off that foot plate that we're working up a sweat and getting some of those splat points. On the floor, we're also likely to possibly earn some splat points when we're working on a strength day. We'll be lifting with heavier weights, which can elicit a higher heart rate response. That said, that's gonna be a lot more common for those bigger muscle groups, like the lower body. So if we're doing a lot of squats or deadlifts or like that, or going heavy, we might notice that heart rate getting up. If we're struggling with a chest press to get our heart rate up on a strength day, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not lifting heavy enough. It might just be a product of the fact that we're laying down, and so our heart rate's not getting up as high. Focus instead on how you feel on the floor on a strength day. If you finish a set knowing you could have done 2, 3, maybe even 4 more reps, it's a sign we need to increase our weight a little bit. If you finish a set on the floor and you're just thinking like, wow, that was my absolute max, but I'm still in the green zone, don't worry so much about your heart rate, focus on how that felt. If you're feeling like that was the total number of reps you could have done at that weight, then that's how you know you're hitting the right spot there. On a power day, we're focusing on really upping our intensities. There's gonna be a lot of quick, explosive movements, particularly on the floor. So on days like that, we're definitely gonna see some splat points on the floor, but we'll also have more time to recover. So we might come back down into those green or even blue zones on both a power or a strength day on the floor. On the treads and the rowers, we're also gonna be maximizing our efforts, which is gonna get those heart rates up, but we might have a little bit more recovery time on the treads, either in a walking recovery or even on a longer base recovery. And then on the rowers, definitely taking a little bit of time after we rack those handles, take a few breaths before we move into our exercises, often treating those exercises on a power day as an active recovery in between our rowing. So getting that heart rate to come back down a little bit. It's okay if we don't see as many splat points on a power day. That's common for a lot of people. Instead, we're focusing on that rate of perceived exertion when we're in the studio. Are we finding our absolute max that day, and are we letting ourselves recover from it? This is something that a lot of people struggle with. If they feel like they're not getting enough splat points, they'll often return to base really quickly when they're on the tread rather than using their full walking recovery. That's a sign that we're not actually finding our true max. If we're going as hard as we can go on those all outs, you should need the full allotted walking recovery for the day. So be mindful of that. With that said, I do want to take a look at some example graphs here. So some lovely friends who will not be named, they've got their little anonymous identities here, have given some of their graphs here so we can see what it looks like on an endurance and a strength day. So you'll see here Jane Doe has very similar graphs across these 2 different days, but where her splat points came from might be very different for those 2 classes based on the work that she was doing. So maybe a little bit more splat points on the floor on this strength day, whereas more on the treads or even the rowers on that endurance day. We come down here to look at Bob's graphs. You can see there's a little bit more variance here in Bob's performance on this endurance day as opposed to this ESP day. One reason might be that we see there's a lot of gray for the endurance day for Bob. It's possible that Bob started out on the floor that day and therefore didn't get that heart rate up for the first few minutes of class because there was, lower intensities with those exercises, lower weights on the floor. That's totally okay. Bob still got 16 splat points. That's over the 12 needed for that afterburn. That's all that matters. Finally, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge my own graphs here. I'm someone whose heart rate gets really high when I'm working out. So you can see here I spend a lot of time in the orange and red zones. This is something that I learned from using a heart rate monitor while training. It's allowed me to really focus on my rate of perceived exertion and calibrate my intensities based on how my body is feeling and not just what my heart rate monitor says. So that has really forced me to stay in touch with my body and the work that I'm doing. If you're someone who is either A, struggling to get your splat points, or B, getting over 30 splat points every single class, it might be a sign that we need to talk to that coach a little bit to figure out what it is that's going on so we can make sure we're tailoring our efforts and getting the most out of every single one of our classes. So again, don't be afraid to talk to us coaches. We are here for you and trying to always help you make the most out of your time in the studio.